Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Hey guys, I spent 3 days and 3 nights in a mental hospital, which is 4 days shorter than I was supposed to. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. It felt like a jail. You're not even allowed outside. If you act up or reject your meds, they will restrain you and force you to stay longer. If the doctor so much as doesn't like you, he can strap you down in a blackened room, alone with your thoughts for hours and hours. They do not accommodate special diets. You are only allowed to use the phone for 10 minutes at a time, and the phones are shut off for 14 hours of the day. You get 1 visiting hour, and by the time they get done searching everybody and signing papers, the visit itself only lasts about 25 minutes. You're not allowed to have your cell phone or any personal belongings. The showers only run for a few seconds at a time before you have to push the button again. Every bedroom is shared with at least 1 other person, and the doors are required to be open at all times of the day and night, letting bright light and noise in constantly. If you have trouble sleeping through all the noise and light, the night shift nurses are loud. They will force you to take sleeping medication against your will and add a minimum of 3 days to your detention. My conclusion is that if you weren't crazy going in, you will at least be coming out slightly more damaged than you were in the first place. I can't believe this is where society throws the mentally ill, depriving them of their basic human rights and dehumanizing them. It makes no sense. It's such a cold, lifeless environment. Does anyone have any experiences with this kind of place? If so, any paranormal experiences? I met some terrifying people, but not much else.
My experience wasn't as bad as yours. I was put in there because I had attempted self-termination. I got there about 2 hours before it was time to wake up for breakfast. The staff were really nice, except the doctor I was assigned to. The first day I freaked out and had a panic attack. I actually was met with a fill-in doctor because my assigned doctor didn't work the weekends. I was not allowed any personal belongings that could contact the outside world. My partner had brought me shampoo, sketchbooks and clothing on the second day. I stayed there for a total of 4. We got to use the phones all day except for lights off. The doors in the bedrooms were not required to be open unless you were in there with an RN or something in order to prevent abuse. I had a choice about the meds. I could either take them or not take them. It was up to me. The nurses and daily activity was probably the best part of the day. Everybody there was super nice and supportive, and they helped us get to know one another better, the patients, because most of us were scared. The only thing I didn't like, aside from the doc, was that we were separated by our disorders, even for small ones. Everybody with drug addictions or something along those lines were in Hall A, and people with depression or schizophrenic disorders were in Hall B. They made meals depending on what you choose the day before, and certain people had special diabetes or allergy meals. I got a roommate on the last day. She was a really nice lady who seemed very normal and frightened. During my last night there, I listened to her talk to herself about her problems to her dead husband. It was rather sad, actually. I can continue with stories about the patients in my hall if you like. Oh, and I really didn't experience anything paranormal. There was some lady going on and on about how she kept getting messages from God, though. The weird thing about it was, some of the things she said about me were personal and true things. I had no idea how she figured that out. One patient, who came in around my day too, was a really loud and anxious Asian guy. It's not really paranormal, mind you. It was just really sad. He was there because he apparently went off on some teenagers that were trying to throw rocks at him, and his entire neighborhood was harassing him. It was not the first time he was there. The people on the street called the police on him, and he ended up there. We ended up being great friends because he was also Asian, and he told me that I was too young to be thinking of self-termination. He came in kicking and screaming though, holy shit.
I was in the psych ward twice, 1 month each time. I honestly have no idea what kind of messed up place you went to. I had a very pleasant experience both times. Yes, I shared a room with another person, but I wasn't in the pediatric intensive care unit, so I didn't get any super crazies. The unit was small. The people and nurses were really friendly. We had groups in the morning, 3 decent meals a day. We could use the phones whenever as long as groups were over. Twice a week we got visitors for 1 hour. You could close your door all you wanted, but all day and night the nurses did checks every 15 minutes. We weren't allowed cell phones or anything that could be used to harm. No spiral notebooks, stapled papers, etc. You could bring your own bedding if you wanted to, and that made it a lot better to have something familiar for me. The shower was a push-button shower, but it was decent. We didn't have mirrors, just a piece of stainless steel. Sort of reflective, screwed to the wall above the sink. We got to play outdoor activities and did many crafts. We would wake up at 6 a.m. for vitals. Breakfast was at 7, and the first group started at 8. Overall, I had a really good experience both times, although I did see and hear some crazy stuff happening on PICU. It was across the giant nurses' station.
My brother spent several weeks in one. He had a psychotic episode caused by drugs. He describes it as a vacation, though. He didn't do anything but sit around and smoke all day. One thing that I found odd was one of the treatment methods he described. They would simulate specific things that bothered the patients. In his case, vicious rumors about him. One of them is about him apparently abusing a woman. He went to his room one day and found bloodstains all over his bedsheets. He also told me how another patient, who had an obsession with weapons, found clubs and other weapons laying about the woods outside of the institution, which the guy then used to vandalize cars in the parking lot. I found that to be very strange, though. I also met one of his therapists when I went to a rave with him, and I spoke to her briefly about him. She told me schizophrenia is genetic, and that I'm bound to get it as well. This freaked me out a little because my family does have a history of mental illness, but a friend of mine who studies medicine explained to me that this means I merely have an increased sensitivity to trigger such an event, and that I should avoid psychedelic drugs, and that I should stick to cocaine or methlol. Nevertheless, I really don't trust the people that treated my brother. He's fine now, though.
Sounds more like your bro is schizo and fantasized all that. Something similar happened to me. I'm still kind of unsure about it. I got to this place and had a room there. At first, the sink in the bathroom made no weird noises, just normal water flush. Then I had a meeting with one of the psychiatrists and told her a lot of stuff, and at one point mentioned how I was devastated that my cats would wonder where I'd gone and why I'm not letting them in, and I started crying. Well, when I went back to the room after and used the sink, I'd hear a weird sound that was like a cat meowing in a medium kind of tone. At first, I thought it was so odd that I looked around for a speaker. Then I determined that it appeared to be behind the wall in the piping. Who knows if it was the pipes or something they did to screw with me.
I spent 2 months in a mental hospital due to severe depression, and my experience was not nearly as bad as yours. I actually met several nice, interesting people there, and the hospital staff was also okay. They did accommodate special diets. I could keep my cell phone, but I had to load it in a nurse's room since we couldn't keep any cables, wires, strings, or anything potentially harmful. My relatives and friends could visit me. Although not in the ward, we had to talk in the hall or in the TV room, and there was no time limit. I also could keep my writing and drawing utensils and borrow books from their library. They did check the packages I got, but that was pretty much it. The meals weren't great. I lost several pounds during my stay, but we had decent bathrooms, could watch TV and play games. I shared a room with 3 other people, 2 women with severe depression and 1 girl with paranoia, who were pretty quiet and not particularly bothersome. I can say I actually got lucky, since the next room had around 7 people, including some seriously disturbed girls with schizophrenia. However, during the nights, many new patients were brought in, and most of them were quite aggressive. I remember a girl who had some serious, self-inflicted, I think, wounds. She was wailing all the time and had to be restrained. The most aggressive ones were sedated, restrained, and kept in a special room. Our ward had a policy that during 24 hours after being admitted, more dangerous cases were sent to other, more isolated hospital in a neighboring city. After almost a month, I was reassigned to the open ward, where I could have a leave for a weekend. However, my relatives had to pick me up, otherwise I couldn't leave. Go for a walk on the hospital grounds and go to the gym. Leaving the hospital grounds was prohibited, but it was fairly easy to sneak in and out totally unsupervised. I had regular meetings with both my psychiatrist and psychologist. Also, they checked my other health issues. I mentioned the other asylum, where more severe cases were reassigned. I actually used to live in the other city, and this hospital was rather infamous. It was built at the end of the 19th century. During the war, Germans killed all the patients due to Action T4. There are several spooky stories about that place, but I must admit, I never really paid attention to them. It's actually a pretty nice place. The hospital is located in the large park with gardens, fountains, and even a small stream going around the place. They have their own chapel, mortuary, and separate sleeping quarters for the doctors. I met several people who were there. According to them, this hospital wasn't as nice as the one I've been to, but they weren't really complaining either. Where do you live, OP? I heard mental wards in the UK are pretty terrible, but I can't really imagine it being that bad.
I too spent a weekend in a psych ward on account of an overzealous 5150. It was a terrible and depressing experience that caused me to lose all faith in the American medical system. Even though the 5150 was called in at around 7 p.m., I was not administered to the ward until nearly 3 a.m., and after an hour of filling out admittance forms, they gave me a sleeping pill and put me in my room knowing I'd be forced to wake up in 3 hours for the morning group. The psychiatrist prescribed me the antidepressant Ativan after a 2-minute interview. Ativan is the most dangerous and addicting psychiatric medication available. Further still, my healthcare provider does not ever prescribe Ativan, so if I had complied with taking my meds, I would have gone through withdrawal shortly after being released. What you say about the place being like a prison is absolutely true. Uncomfortable plastic beds, uncomfortable plastic chairs. The only time you're allowed outside is during the 3 to 5 minute smoke breaks every day, forced curfew, and good luck trying to sleep when you have some asshole shining a flashlight in your face every 15 minutes. The day before I was admitted to the ward, I was watching an episode of Friends. As I had recently heard the reptilian conspiracy that all of our celebrities are actually 8-foot blood-drinking draconians wearing human skin, I jokingly mused to myself, "Man, where is my reptilian Jennifer Aniston?" Upon being admitted, one of the other inmates was a woman who looked exactly like Jennifer Aniston. There was a girl in there who obviously had ADHD, or some other similar disorder. She was a spaz who constantly interrupted everyone's conversations with inane, self-centered comments. This girl apparently was able to read my mind on 2 separate occasions. The first occurred when I was feeling extremely down. I had a friend who had told me they'd planned to commit self-termination that weekend, and I felt powerless, trapped in this prison with no way to reach her. As I contemplated my situation, this girl went from smiling and laughing to straight up bawling without any warning or reason. This was such strange timing that I couldn't help but think that the thought was connected. What happened later proved my suspicions. During one of the other inmates' confessions, another girl had said how scared and worthless she felt when her father told her that he would kill her himself if he could. The girl with ADHD literally began a slow clap. I gave her a disbelieving look and thought to myself, this girl needs to slow down. As soon as I finished the thought, she snapped her head towards me with wide eyes, asking me if I had said something to her. I know it's not much, but who knows what the actual side effects of the handful of medications are, combined, that each of those people were on. Also, concerning the food, the quality and care was terrible. Even though we were able to write down any dietary restrictions we had, the staff completely ignored it. I was a vegetarian at the time and was constantly served meat. Another man who was a diabetic had gotten to the point where his blood sugar was so high after his week-long stay that they couldn't measure it at the facility. What was amusing is that a gay man was brought in, given his own room to avoid any conflict, and convinced about 6 other people that he was actually an undercover CIA agent. He also clogged his room's shower and toilet on multiple occasions, just to mess with the staff.
Well, these are all terrible places. Recently in France, reporters, aided by psychiatrists, managed to get interned for obviously no reason considering they are perfectly sane. Once there, Not only they realized how poorly treated people were, but they also realized that they could act perfectly normal and say they are. They were still heavily medicated. It actually almost ended poorly for one of them. And while some psychiatrists had planned to get them out at some point, they had to actually escape the ward. Can't find anything about it right now, though the details are of little importance. Conclusion is, psych wards in France are a terrible place, and if you end there for whatever reason, you're fucked. And that's because they follow the kind of recommendations every psych ward in the world follows. Though your complaints are a bit overkill. I mean, half of that is valid for any hospital.
Okay, so my mum has been diagnosed with everything from schizophrenia to bipolar to eating disorders to depression, so most of my childhood she was heavily medicated or in asylums. Mum saw shadow people everywhere and had hallucinations. I think the scariest one was we were at a church and she saw her naked body impaled on the pipe organ. I went to visit her as often as I could, but it was emotionally very difficult for me to see my mum in that condition. I was used to her crying and sleeping all day, but the places she had to stay were like dungeons. The energy around them just felt sick and black. I remember there was this older catatonic woman who would follow me around. I was about 12 or 13, and thought I was her dead daughter. This woman would come up to me and grab my shoulders and scream, "I should have aborted you," before the lazy nurses would come drug her up. The security was so non-existent, my mum managed to get a bunch of wall tacks and cut up her hands without them noticing. That was such a dark, dark time for me. I missed my mum, but I hated those places so much. My brother was far away at college, and my dad blamed me entirely for my mum being ill. Every day he'd say things like, "Your mum's in that goddamn crazy barn because of you. You did this to her. Are you happy? Where the hell did I go wrong with you?" When I got diagnosed with ADHD and tried to get help with organizing therapy or medication, my dad was like, "Just like your mother, always looking for a teat to suckle, inventing all these problems to make excuses for being lazy. I bet we'll have to lock you up as well. You are a failure." I am so afraid that he's right, that I'm going to screw everything up and end up locked away in an institution. I know this isn't normal, too spooky material, but it's my deepest fear.
Get away from that horrible, abusive man immediately, even if you have to sleep in your car or under tree branches. Once you're away from the problem, which is obviously your dad, you'll be amazed at how sane you become and stay. I moved 1,600 miles away from my dear mother, and it was better than all the psych meds I've ever read about. Sanity up 200. The first step is to realize that he's the nut and not you.
Doesn't make a lot of sense until you realize that they don't care about anything except money and control. How can you get better if you are not allowed to go outside, exercise, talk to people who are at least coherent? Nurses and doctors don't count. Check up on you every 15 or 20 minutes, including all night, so you eventually have to take sleeping medication to pass the time. It could be considered worse than jail. Back in the day, you could pull the "I'm calling an attorney" trick. But I don't think that works anymore since it's so difficult to sue doctors.
Yeah, I know some are better than others, but the John George Psychiatric Pavilion is not a nice one. I stayed there for 4 months when I was supposed to be released after 3, and in the unit I was in, there were people that ranged from level 99 psycho-cannibal genital mutilators to sad 16-year-old self-attempting girls. The abusive staff and a generally garbage environment. Couldn't sleep at night for fear of someone coming into your room and trying to strangle you. No problems with the showers. I saw some crazy things. One day I was stereotypically playing Go Fish with my roommate Ted, and a young dude came in high on bath salts. He probably weighed 100 pounds and was 5'4", a tiny framed guy. This dude ripped a bulletin board that was screwed into the wall, covered with plexiglass out of the wall, and threw it like a gorilla at this little nurse station in the center of the room. Took 5 guys to handle him. Moral of the story: bath salts give you superpowers.
I've never been a patient in one of these places, but I did work at one for about a year. Our residents were juveniles, and they were generally placed there instead of in a detention center, so they were generally very aggressive. However, you would occasionally get someone who was just self-ending depressed, and I hated to see them mixed in with the really violent residents. From what I was told and what I experienced, The food was trash and often undercooked. Each resident had a room to his or herself. The resident could open the door from the inside without a key, but nobody could get in without a key. As long as the resident wasn't on 24-hour watch, he or she could take a short shower by themselves at the designated times. No electronic devices, no shoestrings, no pencils, no jewelry, and no makeup. Visits and phone calls were rare, and they had to be approved in advance, and they were often denied. The staff was a mixed bag. Some of the staff were kind and really cared, but others just seemed to want to make the kids miserable. However, the worst part, there were no release dates, and treatment was so ineffective that pretty much anyone admitted stayed there until they were 18. In my year there, I saw one patient released because they were cured. They had been in there for 3.5 years. I ended up leaving because I kept having nightmares that I would somehow end up in there, even though I was over 18 and I would never get out.
I was locked up in an institution for about 2 weeks. I had nothing but positive experiences there with the staff and doctors, but I just saw a psychiatrist right at the beginning, for about 10 minutes and for about 20 minutes when they released me. I'm treated great by my friends. They are really supportive, and I'm very thankful for having them. Other than with my closest friends, I tend to be careful and not just tell anybody, since the stigma is still strong and negative, and I don't want anyone to be scared of me. I'd think you might be in luck. At least the patients would love someone to talk to. It's pretty boring there. Also, I was very glad every time a friend visited, so I was allowed outside or in the city with him or her. So if you call your local mental health clinic and ask if you can volunteer there, at least the patients would be delighted, and I don't think the staff and doctors would mind, but I don't know. Another problem we schizos have is that we smoke, but sometimes aren't allowed to go outside to buy new smokes, so just for that, someone like you would be very welcomed by most patients there.
Well, I'm from what you would call a third world country. First language is Spanish, so excuse my crappy recounting skills. In this country, we have a public hospital and health system, which is designated for those who can't afford private health care. It is managed by the government, and as you would expect, they don't invest too much on asylums for the mentally ill. So you either have enough money to go to a decent clinic, which would mean that you were in fact a functional part of the society before your internment, hence you could pay for it, or at least you were lucky enough to have a family that would do so, or you end up in your local hospice. I'm not implying that every single hospital is crap, but most of them are. Old facilities, poorly maintained through time. The one in my city is huge, and even some areas are shut down because they could collapse, and structures are unstable. There are rumors of these areas being used to torture and kill people during the dictatorship in the 70s. Not hard to believe, knowing there's a cemetery and a prison near the hospital area. There are lots of creepy stories involving this area as well. Here, the government treats crazy people like garbage. Even sometimes they're not mentally ill. Sometimes poor people that get a bit delusional for living in the streets, or poor people with mental disabilities of some kind are locked up as well. Other people simply get misdiagnosed and end up with the wrong meds. It's well known that some places don't even have hot water, and people have to shower with freezing water in the middle of winter. There are cases of abuse by hospital staff, and even though you can see it from time to time in the news, nobody seems to care. Some of the non-dangerous patients have days out, but all they do is wander the area with no apparent activities, and they have a very neglected appearance. I feel pity for those who have no resources and end up there.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.